Thanks for joining me, Lori Goldman, today on For the Sake of the Argument. I had Kristian Grant here. She currently is House Rep in the 82nd House District in Grand Rapids. She talked about a lot of things that she's been doing to make Michigan better for its citizens. But something interesting that we kind of talked about after the cameras cut, the zoning commissions that now have all of the clout to say where housing can be built, what kind of housing, where commercial districts can be, where they can't, has kind of taken the place, she was explaining to me, of the old codicils they used to put in deeds, like no blacks, no Catholics, no Jews, and other things that kept people out, redlining, all the things that cities did to make sure it was impossible for people, all people, to live where they wanted or could. So this is fascinating. We have to really keep our eyes and our ears open and be on the watch for how government sometimes perverts what they say they're trying to do on our behalf when it's against the behalf of all of our sisters and brothers. Catch me again on For the Sake of the Argument on all social media platforms. That's not a request. And have a great day. State Rep Kristian Grant. I always mess up names.
Okay.
Thanks for coming here to For the Sake of the Argument. You're currently the House Rep in the 82nd District. Tell me what that covers.
So the 82nd District is primarily Grand Rapids, pretty much splitting or taking the centerpiece of Grand Rapids. I call it the heart of the city. I'm sure my surrounding reps don't really like that, my neighboring reps. And then I get a small part of Wyoming.
Okay. And you drove from there today. How long did it take you to get here?
2.5 hours. It was
Holy
good weather,
cow.
so.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I feel honored that you came. Thank you. One of your top issues is housing. What do you think we need to do to address housing affordability? And I want to tell you, that comes up in almost every podcast with every guest. And a lot of them, know the broad strokes, but what do you think we can do to fix it?
Yeah, so housing for me is my top issue. And when I came into the legislature, I was asking, like, what's happening with housing? Who's owning this work? And they were like, well, you can own it if you would like. So I started doing the research and saying, what is the main thing that we can do through policy that would lower the cost of housing and increase the amount of housing that's available? And the answer is really boring, and that may be why we don't see it happening as much. It's not really sexy, but over the last 50 to 60 years, zoning policy all across the country, not just in Michigan, but zoning policy, the amount of zoning restrictions have just increased and stacked on top of each other, and it's made housing really unaffordable to build. And it's also limited just where housing can be built. So there's not a lot of places that you can actually build housing when you look at the zoning.
So it's different than years before. When you say zoning restrictions, you're talking about the fact that they are limiting, they're reserving more space for maybe business, commerce, parks.
The best way for people to think about it is when you hear your neighbor saying, we don't want that new apartment building in our neighborhood, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that is really talking about zoning. So when you talk to people who are protesting new housing, they always acknowledge that new housing is needed, just not in my backyard, right? You can do it wherever you want, just not here. And that sentiment is so widespread that it really limits the amount of housing that we have available. People think, apartment dwellers, I don't want them here, or people who maybe want to live in a tiny home or a smaller home than me, a duplex. Sounds great, just don't do it around here. But if we look at where people actually got their foot in the door for housing, it may not be me, but it might be my grandparents or, yours. Maybe they had that little bungalow to start with. If they were living with the same restrictions that we have now when it comes to zoning, they wouldn't have been able to enter the housing market either. The type of policy that I'm working on would allow more duplexes with less red tape. a lot of these things you can build, but you have to just go and beg the zoning board or the planning commission to allow it instead of it just being allowed by right. So we look at making sure duplexes are allowable, smaller lot sizes. So right now, some places in the state require that you have an acre or more before you can build a house.
Wow, that's a lot.
That is a lot, especially with the price of land right now. So if you purchase that land and decide to build a home, it's going to be $1 million plus home. It has to be.
Yeah.
So a lot of the restrictions limit density. But if we look at the neighborhoods that people love the most, there usually is a lot of density. I have a historic neighborhood in my district called Heritage Hill. It's renowned all across the country. People love Heritage Hill, these huge, beautiful homes. But right now, it would be illegal to build that same type of neighborhood because they're beautiful homes, but they may have 4 to 5 apartments in them. And they had these really nice carriage homes that were built in the back. But now those are technically ADUs, right? They're little studio apartments now. And if we want
ADU.
An accessory dwelling unit.
Okay.
So an ADU is if someone would build like a little studio above their garage or maybe a 1-bedroom apartment, a little loft. Those are ADUs. My package that I'm working on would actually allow ADUs to be built. But there are a lot of people who don't agree with that, right? I don't want renters in my majority owner occupied neighborhood, right? So we've come to a place where there's no way to really enter the housing cycle and there's no way to exit. If you're in, you're good. But if you're a 21 to 30-year-old trying to get your first home, there's no real entry point for you. And if you're a senior who said, I raised my family here, we had a great time, but I don't need this 4-bedroom house anymore.
Or the taxes.
Right? So your taxes are locked in this home. But say you'd like to downsize to a nice townhome or condo, you can't afford what those new taxes are going to be or the $400,000 price tag on that. And senior housing is starting at $300,000 to $400,000. It's not realistic. And so we have to build on-ramps and off-ramps for people, which means we have to have more flexible types of housing.
I like that. And along those lines, rapid construction, I don't know what they're building, but they're building a lot. Construction is increasing every day, every minute. What do you think about the need to follow or implement better or more safety regulations to protect people when they're buying homes or buildings to use for their commerce?
I think safety regulations are really important, but I'd also like to address, we do see a lot of construction happening, mainly for rental type of properties, apartments, townhomes that are for rent. And that was another thing I asked. I learned doing all of my research that as the government, we really shape the type of housing that's going to be built. So in 2009, 2010, when the market was taking a dive and land banks started having, just mass inventory, in Detroit alone, there were 70,000 homes in the land bank. Flint saw a lot of homes go to the land bank. When you ask, where are those homes now? Because people need them, what the state was doing, we were funding demolitions. We would not fund, the repair of those homes. And so a rehab may have been $30,000 to $40,000 when demos were, $40,000 to $50,000 per property. And what would have happened if we would have funded rehabs instead of just blighting complete neighborhoods by saying the only money that we will give you is to knock these properties over? And so I started asking the questions too, when we're funding through grants and things for MISHDA and other places, are we funding the construction of single-family homes or things that can be owner-occupied? Or are we funding developers to build properties that they'll own forever, but the rent will never stabilize for those things? So it can be affordable housing if you can afford it today, but can you afford it 10 years from now when the rent continues to increase? And so, I think that these are real questions that we have to ask and the conversations that we have to have. Are we making sure that Michiganders not only can afford a roof over their head today, but for the next few generations?
Is there something you can do as House Rep in your job right now that would level the playing field and make people be able to rehab, or these land banks or these institutions choose rehab over demolition?
Yes.
Do you have
So
any control over that?
we do. Land banks, I actually was able to pass some legislation that would allow for more city land banks across the state. Detroit was the only city who had a land bank because they had so much inventory. Um, so now we are able to have city land banks throughout the state, and the intention was that a city can have a lot more of a focus on how do we serve our constituents or our community through the property. So being more intentional. Now I have a package called the Land Bank Accountability Package, making sure that the people who are overseeing the land bank are having that in mind. Instead of just selling to the highest bidder who may then displace a community or change the makeup of a community, saying, we're going to sell these properties to people who have the best intent and the highest use for that community. So that could be for a commercial property too, right? Not just a residential. But I think that we have to hold land banks accountable and work with them. Right now, the state doesn't really fund land banks. So they're kind of rogue because they're on their own. They have all these properties and they're like, we have to pay our bills somehow. So everything just goes to the highest bidder. And what we found is a lot of times those buyers are out of state buyers.
I've seen that too. So you serve on a number of committees related to affordability. One of them is the Economic Competitiveness Committee and the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. What kind of work are you doing on those committees?
Honestly, during the first part of this term, we have, well, we did look at how to fund roads. That did happen through the Transportation Committee, and that was really a big learning curve for myself and many of my colleagues on that committee because we were brand new on those committees. Most of us had no transportation background when we jumped into that work. And so that was a big learning curve, and the governor's office was also working on, how will we make sure we're funding these roads. But now we're coming to a part of the term where a lot of people are really hopeful that we will actually be productive. Last year, we didn't see a lot of bills move through the full legislature. And so people want to talk about how can we make Michigan more mobile? How can, I had to drive 2.5 hours to get here. My goodness, if I was sitting on a train, the amount of work that I would have gotten done during that time, would have been astronomical. So hopefully we will start having conversations about those things in that committee. Economic competitiveness is really economic development. And I'm hopeful that we will start really looking, whether people want to admit it or not, we are feeling an economic recession right now.
Yes.
And so I'm hoping that in that committee, we will really start having conversations about how we can move our state through this recession, how we can make sure that small businesses are secure and they make it through to the other side. Small businesses and mid-sized businesses are hit the hardest during these times. We've had a lot of conversation about large corporations, but most Michiganders are employed by a smaller mid-sized business, and I think we need to turn the conversation on how we support them.
You were also on the Grand Rapids School Board, and when you were elected, you were the youngest person ever elected to that
Yes.
board. How old were you?
I was 26, which I thought was old at the time. Time gives you
Oy.
perspective.
So when you were elected to that board and now you're working in the House, how did that prepare you for this? And how does that work on the school board prepare to what you do in the legislature? And did you prefer one to the other?
So I will say GRPS, at the time that I was serving on the board, we had about 17,000 students. We were one of the largest employers in the county. And you see almost every issue come across your desk when you're serving a district of that size. So it was incredible the way that it prepared me. I didn't know that until I started this work. But schools aren't just dealing with education. I think we'd be better off if schools only had to educate children. But unfortunately, especially urban school districts, we have to figure out how to feed children, how to protect them from the myriad of issues that they're seeing at home. How sometimes
And in school.
and in school, right? Sometimes how are we going to clothe them, right? We have washer and dryers in a lot of our schools at GRPS. Their mental health, the special education needs that they may have. There's just so much that you come across in a school district. And so what you see is where are the gaps in community and in society, and that really prepared me to come. A lot of people asked me during my first campaign, why are you talking about economic development? You just came from the school board, right? You should be talking about education. And I'm like, I'm talking about economic development because the largest barriers to our kids learning really deal with, did they eat before they came to school today? Did they have a roof over their head? Did they have to deal with some type of violence or abuse before they got here? Like, those were the things that our kids were coming to school with on their mind. And someone needs to be that voice for them.
That's pretty heavy stuff. So do you think that prepared you a little better for when you had to enter, the Michigan State House and deal with people in your own party and across the aisle and the problems that are presented, by serving the whole state of Michigan?
Yeah, I think it prepared me very well.
We've seen historically some big Democratic wins in off-year elections, and we're heading into midterms. So what do you think the top concerns of Democrats should be going into these midterms so that we can win back the trust of the voting public?
Yeah, I think the people are telling us what's important to them. Can they afford to put food on the table and a roof over their head? They do not want to fund agencies that are coming into their communities and bringing violence and division. They're concerned about education. They don't want to fund wars overseas, right? Like, some of these are statewide issues and some of these are at the federal level.
All the things we're doing.
Yeah, right. And I think that we have to start listening to them. They're telling us exactly what's important to them. As much as we tell people, you have to vote, you have to vote. And as much as I may not agree with people choosing to sit it out, when so many people are choosing to sit it out, we have to start listening to them.
Yeah, I hope we do, for the sake of our nation.
Yeah.
You just launched Sunday Dinner and Dialogue. Cool name. What's your goal with this program, and how did you come up with it?
So my goal with this is, I say this a lot, but 2024 now, as we were in a campaign year, my staff and I, and in the house we get 2 full-time staff members, we drove about 20,000 miles all around the state, and we knocked just over 16,000 doors. And these weren't what we would call friendly parts of the state, especially for someone who looks like me, a Black woman. And the conversations that I had on those doors just really amplified for me the lack of community. And a lot of times that people just want to be heard. I heard some pretty outrageous things on the doors, but when I put my personal feelings aside, I was just like, this person just wants to be heard.
What was something outrageous, if you can recall an example?
Oh, I can recall. There was a man in Battle Creek who was telling me that he was really proud of Trump because Trump wasn't going to pay China. And he said many other things. But at this point in the conversation, my staff was like, come on, let's just go. But we hit a point where I was like, let's see how far this is going to go. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, what do you think will happen, right? And he said, well, Trump is going to fight back, right, if we have to go to war. And I said, America going to war with China, you think that's a good idea? He said, absolutely.
Wow.
And then he went on to say, if there aren't enough people, his friend was standing there, and at this point in the conversation, at the beginning of the conversation, his friend was nodding along, but at this point, his friends kind of like, where are we heading? And he said, if I have to fight, it'll be me, it'll be him. And his friends like, whoa. And he's like, we're all just going to jump into combat. And I said, you think you're trained for combat with China? And it really just magnified for me how far gone some people are, and just that people don't understand the realities of war, right? They have disengaged in the fact that
Isn't that a luxury that they haven't
it's a
had
complete
to serve?
luxury, right?
Yeah.
I come from a family of Navy men. My grandfather was one of the first African American steam engineers, but even besides that, seeing the atrocities that cross my phone every day and seeing the aftermath of what war can do, and that America truly has no idea what war looks like on our land, and that there's no coming back from that. We play video games and people are desensitized, but people are paying, paying for this, for war every day. And so I realized at that moment that there are people who are isolated. They're sitting in front of a TV. And a lot of times when people would open their doors and talk to me, you would think I turned on Fox News, because that it was just a complete regurgitation of that. And as much as I want to say, I just never want to talk to those people again. That's why. That's why we are where we are, because people are isolated, they're alone, and the only person talking to them are news pundits or the president.
It's brave of you, but I think it's very necessary and needed. We're never going to get to where we want to be as a country or even as neighbors if we don't start speaking to one another civilly and listening and trying to learn, even if we don't agree.
And I think there's room for real discourse. Like I grew up being a nerd. I loved debating. I would go to my best friend's house. Her dad's a professor, mom's a lawyer. And we would talk about what was in the paper and what was on the news, and we would debate and we would yell and we would, whatever. And I learned so much. There are still conversations that I bring with me to the house floor that came from that living room. And I think we have like this fake civility thing going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where people are like, don't argue, don't yell.
Oh,
no,
yeah, God forbid.
I think that we should raise our voices because these issues are really urgent. But if you can't take that, right? Like, a lot of people can't take someone raising their voice and proving them wrong. So they just sit behind a screen all day with an avatar instead of their real picture and say snarky things. And it's just not healthy.
I agree. What's something that people would find interesting about working in the legislature in Lansing?
I think working in the legislature is somewhere in between the TV show The Office and the TV show The House of Cards. Like, it's not that dramatic, but it is. Like, like, there are times where I'm like, wow, we just made a really serious decision, and I don't know if we did all that we could. And then there are times where I'm like, we really dug in deep, and this is just a really hard place to be. So when people ask me, like, is politics like TV? I'm like, yes and no. I don't know of any buried bodies or anything anywhere, not that deep into House of Cards. But, like, it is about relationships. It is about who can you go talk to. It is about, our constituents showing up and really voicing their concerns. Some people feel so disengaged, but I tell them, like, you got to show up. You got to tell your story and speak, and you never know how that will sway the person that's representing you.
Have you been able to build bridges with your comrades on the other side, the Republicans? Have you found anybody that you've been able to work with or bounce ideas off? Has that been something that's happened?
I have, actually. So the housing issue I've been working on since day one in my time here, and I'm now on year 4. And when I came in, we were in the majority, and people said, this really doesn't have to be bipartisan work because you guys have control of the House, and in the Senate and you can just keep it moving. But I found out that there were people who were really interested in the exact type of work that I was doing. So I gave them a call because I don't like double doing work. So I'm like, you've done this work. Tell me where you are. What have you learned? And I brought them along. Well, what do you know? The House flips, and those same people who could move ahead without me are now working with me as well. So we don't agree on everything, and I don't pretend to agree just to go along to get along, but there are some things that we do agree on, and that's the work that we do.
Last question. ICE, abolish or reform, and why?
Abolish. And why is because I understand history in this country. The things that I see ICE doing breaks my heart. But it's not the first time that I've been heartbroken over different agencies and the lives that they've taken and the harm that they've caused to communities. And so I see ICE as an acceleration of things that have already existed in this country. And now that it's affecting communities outside of mine, I hope that people will stand up and put a stop to it. But, you know, people refuse to see how law enforcement was just an evolution of slave patrol and in other things. There's just things that people don't want to talk about when it's in black and white. And now that we have shades of gray in here with ICE, I hope that there are conversations we can have.
I lied. I have one more question.
Okay.
You're running for re-election in a
am.
pretty blue district, House District 82. You have currently one Democratic opponent. Why are you the choice for the people?
I'm the choice for the people because I do the work. I don't just attend the rallies or, you know, say things to hype people up. I also do the work. I'm really proud of my legislative record, the bills that I've been able to pass, but I'm even more excited about the policy that I'm working on now, and I hope to get across the finish line.
Kristian Grant, thanks for being on For the Sake of the Argument today.
Thanks so much for having me.